We now have every rivet of the Titanic, every detail, we can put it back together. So for the first time, we can actually see what happened.
The Titanic is not lying quietly at the bottom of the ocean, almost 12,500 feet below the North Atlantic. The wreck is slowly collapsing.
A new digital scan of the Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments.
Rusting away and being eaten by the sea, the ship is split in two, with its inner spaces exposed, crushing pressure and endless darkness. Deep within the wreck are hidden decks that almost no humans have ever entered, sealed off and silently decaying. What you are about to witness has remained concealed for more than 112 years. The cold, haunting interior. The remotely operated vehicle slipped into the wreck through a jagged tear along the ship's side. As it moved inside, its lights exposed hallways that had not been seen since 1912. Every surface was coated in rust. The floors were blanketed with thick layers of silt, settled and untouched for more than 100 years. Electrical cables dangled from the ceilings, snapped during the sinking, and left exactly where they fell, never disturbed by human hands. Inside the ship, there was no sound except the low, constant hum of the vehicle. At this depth, immense pressure pushed down on metal that was already weakened and breaking apart. The temperature stayed frozen at 4 degrees Celsius, the same deadly cold that filled the ship on the night it went down. Nothing down here ever truly changed. Time did not advance. It simply eroded everything it touched. As the vehicle pushed farther in, the destruction grew more severe. Doorways had given way. Walls had softened and bowed. Areas that once carried passengers now crumbled with the slightest movement. The pilot navigated carefully, aware that one wrong motion could cause a collapse or send clouds of silt exploding into space, blinding everything. What covered the ship was more than simple rust. The metal was being consumed by living bacteria that fed on iron, slowly hollowing the structure from within. Over decades, these organisms spread, adding weight and accelerating the collapse of entire sections of the wreck. The most disturbing element was the silence. These rooms were once alive with voices, engines, and music. Now, only darkness and decay remained. The Titanic was no longer just breaking down. It was vanishing, and it was only a matter of time before even these hidden interiors ceased to exist forever. First class and second class sections. 4 were the breakup point, where the bow drove itself nearly 60 feet into the ocean floor, rest the remains of what were once floating palaces of modern luxury. The first-class staterooms represented the height of elegance for their time. Cabin B-58 was designed in the refined Louis C style, featuring gold-accented furniture, rich carpets thick enough to mute footsteps, and marble wash basins supplied with running water. Cabin C-56 reflected the bold grandeur of Louis Quatorze's design. On just A and B decks alone, there were 96 single-berth rooms, each crafted in historic styles ranging from Queen and to Italian Renaissance, offering passengers unmatched comfort at sea. Today, almost nothing of those walls remains. Because many of these cabins were built using pine and teak, which chosen for beauty rather than long-term survival, their structures slowly collapsed inward. What exists now is a maze of hanging electrical wires suspended in darkness, brass bed frames sticking out of silt like skeletal remains, and marble washstands resting where entire rooms once stood. Door handles are still attached to doors that now open to nothing at all. The cruel irony is that the very details that define first-class luxury also contributed to its destruction. Softwoods decay quickly at extreme depths. Only stronger hardwoods like mahogany and teak have survived in recognizable shapes. The lavatories are still visible because they were reinforced with steel, while elegant drawing rooms have completely vanished. During James Cameron's 2003 Ghost of the Abyss expedition, cameras traveled into select first-class staterooms. They captured the ornate Louis Quinn's fireplace from Bruce Ismay's private sitting room. Ismay being the White Star Line managing director who lived while more than 1,500 others perished. In Mrs. Cardaise's suite, a marble Adam-style fireplace still stands, a silent symbol of refinement surrounded by ruin. Shattered cut-glass window screens from the first-class dining room now lie scattered across the debris field, their original purpose lost to time. Parts of the reception room on D-deck still survive, as does a section of the first-class dining room. These are believed to be among the only public spaces that remain partially intact anywhere on the wreck. But once you move into second-class areas, the scene changes completely. The section containing second-class accommodations did not settle gently like the bow. It twisted violently, imploded, and collapsed during its chaotic descent to the ocean floor. Second-class passengers once enjoyed cabins that rivaled first-class rooms on many other ships, complete with glossy white-painted oak paneling and mahogany furnishings. Today, all of it has been crushed into unrecognizable debris. What remains are scattered remnants across the wreck field, fragments of a library, sections of the smoking room's steel framework, and pieces of oak paneling. The second-class grand staircase now exists only in old photographs. The elevator shaft has been reduced to a warped column of metal, barely distinguishable from the surrounding wreckage. Yet while the passenger spaces speak of lost elegance, the mechanical heart of the ship below tells a far more brutal story. Boiler rooms and engine machinery. The vehicle moved even deeper into the wreck, descending into the true core of the ship. This was the engine room, the place where Titanic's immense power had been created. Two enormous reciprocating engines rose nearly 3 stories tall, their steel cylinders locked in place and looming over the surrounding destruction. Each engine once drove one of the outer propellers, while a massive central turbine powered the middle propeller. Together, these machines produced more than 50,000 horsepower, pushing almost 900 feet of steel to the North Atlantic at full speed. In 1912, these engines ranked among the most powerful ever installed on a passenger ship. They were designed to operate non-stop and withstand tremendous strain. When Titanic sank, the vessel ripped itself apart with brutal force, tearing through decks and bulkheads. Much of the nearby machinery was shattered, crushed, or scattered across the ocean floor. Yet the main engines remained standing exactly where they had been running when the power finally failed. Thick rust and biological growth now coat every surface, clinging to edges and joints, slowly eating away at the metal, while the towering structures remain upright like hollow monuments. Past the engines lay the boiler rooms, where the devastation was far more severe. Titanic carried 29 boilers spread across 6 boiler rooms. Hundreds of men labored in these spaces, shoveling coal by hand for endless hours to keep the furnaces alive. The environment was brutal. The air burned with heat, smoke, and coal dust. Temperatures often climbed close to 50 degrees Celsius, and physical exhaustion was unavoidable. When the iceberg struck, Boiler Room number 6 was one of the first areas to flood. Icy seawater surged into rooms filled with superheated steel. Steam exploded violently through the space. Some men were burned to death within seconds. Others were knocked down, crushed by collapsing machinery, or trapped as the water rose faster than escape was possible. There was no alarm and no chance to prepare. Many never left the boiler rooms alive. As the ship tore itself apart, entire boilers were ripped from their mounts and hurled into the open ocean. Several came to rest in the debris field, where they still lie more than a century later. Their thick cast iron shells resisted the corrosion that destroyed much of the ship, but their extreme weight ensured they would never be lifted from the seabed. They remained scattered between the bow and stern, silent and unmoving. One of these boilers became the key to discovering the wreck in 1985. Its unmistakable outline appeared on sonar, finally ending 73 years of unsuccessful searches. Inside these sections, the silence feels overwhelming. Pressure gauges still hang from the walls. Open grates where stokers once climbed down into boiler rooms frame empty voids. The machines endured. The men who powered them were erased suddenly and without mercy. And deeper within the wreck, the evidence of destruction becomes even more unsettling. Third-class and forgotten corridors. Deep within the bow section are corridors that most expeditions rarely enter. These were the third-class areas, narrow passageways that once housed more than 1,000 passengers. Immigrants chasing new lives in America, families traveling with children, and single men placed toward the bow while women and families were usually assigned closer to the stern. They paid about £7 for their tickets, roughly equal to £900 today, which included meals, something considered a luxury on many ships of that era. The living conditions reflected that unexpected quality. Each cabin was equipped with a plumbed wash basin with running water, electric lighting, and heating. For passengers accustomed to overcrowded steerage and poor sanitation, this felt like unimaginable comfort. But there was a catch. Only 2 bathtubs served all 710 third-class passengers. When remotely operated vehicles explore these areas today, the scenes are deeply unsettling. The corridors have transformed into twisting labyrinths. Doorways are sealed shut by sediment. Walls that once divided cabins have collapsed, forming vast open spaces that even veteran pilots find shocking. During a 1991 expedition, the Nautilus submersible entered the third-class bow and encountered floors coated in rustic glass, bulkheads barely visible in the darkness, and collapsed sink basins still holding a light fixture in place. The mail sorting room has also been visited. Mail bags remain scattered, covering the pink, hair-like bacterial growth. Nearby, the gate leading to cargo areas is still locked, a barrier that no longer serves any purpose. What makes these areas truly haunting is not how they look, but what they represent. During the sinking, third-class passengers face confusing layouts with no clear routes to lifeboats. Stewards were stationed throughout the ship to guide them upward, but many passengers could not speak English and were unable to read directional signs. Some stumbled upon emergency doors that opened into second-class spaces. Others discovered iron ladders that climbed 5 or 6 decks up toward the boat deck. Passenger Olis Abelseth later described the chaos, climbing steep ladders while helping his sister grip iron rungs in complete darkness, with freezing water rising behind them. Patrick Canavan survived because he had explored the ship earlier and remembered the location of an emergency door, which he used to guide fellow passengers to safety. Daniel Buckley witnessed a steward force a steerage passenger back down the stairs, only for that same man to break through moments later as panic overpowered all rules. In the end, only 25% of third-class passengers survived, and among those survivors, very few were men. The corridors inside the wreck do not show rows of lock gates as many people imagine. Instead, they reveal a confusing maze. Third-class accommodations were better than those on most ships of the time, but they were placed deepest inside the hull, farthest from escape. Today, these passageways have become silent tombs, markers of choices that could not be made in routes that could not be found. And while the third-class corridors speak of confusion and desperation, the lifeboat deck tells a different, equally tragic story. Lifeboat decks and implosion damage. The boat deck was a final section of the Titanic to slip beneath the sea. At around 2:05 a.m., only 15 minutes before the ship disappeared completely, this deck sank below the surface of the North Atlantic. It was the last place where people stood, waited, and clung to hope. Today, almost none of it remains intact. Along both sides of this deck, once stood lifeboat davits, heavy mechanical arms built by the Welland Davitt and Engineering Company. These devices were designed to lower lifeboats safely into the water. The system itself was capable of handling up to 64 lifeboats. Titanic carried only 20. Those 20 boats could hold 1,178 people, while 2,208 souls were on board. That shortfall determined who survived and who did not. When the ship broke apart and plunged violently toward the seabed, most of the davits were ripped away from the deck. They were torn loose like unsecured equipment and scattered across the debris field. A few, however, remained upright. One davit near the bow still stands, frozen in place, as if waiting to lower lifeboat number 1. That boat carried just 12 people, even though it had room for 40. Nearby, another davit remains locked in its launching position where collapsible A had once been secured, preserved at the exact instant before waves ripped the boat away. During recovery missions, RMS Titanic incorporated raised one davit arm along with its base to the surface. What it revealed was chilling. One side of the mechanism showed the arm lowered. The other side was still raised. One lifeboat had been launched. The other never was. The difference between those two positions represents dozens of lives that were never saved. In 2024, the first expedition to visit the wreck since 2010 uncovered another heartbreaking loss. The iconic bow railing, A 15-foot section on the port side, seen in countless photographs and films, had collapsed entirely. Imaging confirmed it fell as a single piece and now rests on the seafloor below. This was destruction that could never be reversed or recorded again. The ship was decaying faster than scientists had expected. Bacteria continued to consume the iron. Ocean currents pressed constantly against weakened structures. Deep-sea storms shifted heavy sections of metal. Repeated landings by human submersibles also contributed to collapse in certain areas. The upper decks were already giving way. The forward mast lost its crow's nest decades ago, snapping off and vanishing into the darkness. The gymnasium roof collapsed. Captain Smith's quarters were torn open when an exterior wall failed. His bathtub is still visible, for now. What remains of the boat deck today are absences, gaps where structures once stood, empty davits, missing railings, broken spaces where people once waited for rescue. The bow shows severe decay, but the stern tells an even darker story, one that reveals just how brutal the ship's final moments truly were. The broken stern. About 2,000 feet south of the bow lies wreckage that hardly looks like a ship at all. This is the stern. Unlike the bow, which descended mostly intact and buried itself nose first into the seabed, the stern endured extreme violence. It rose almost vertically before tearing away from the forward section, then spiraled downward in a twisting, uncontrolled fall. When it separated, the stern was not fully flooded, meaning large pockets of air were trapped inside as it plunged. As it descended deeper, the increasing water pressure crushed that trapped air in a series of violent implosions. Entire decks collapsed onto one another. The hull folded, buckled, and twisted like paper. By the time the stern struck the ocean floor, it had transformed from a recognizable structure into a mangled mass of steel, only about 350 feet long, but scattered across a much wider area. This section once contained the second-class accommodations, the library, the smoking room, the enclosed promenade. All of it was compressed into wreckage so severe that identifying individual spaces requires expert-level analysis. The steel housing of the second-class staircase can still be recognized if you know exactly what to look for, along with promenade windows that remain locked inside their frames. 5 boilers from the aft boiler rooms are still seated in their original positions, remarkably intact despite the surrounding devastation. They rest among torn bulkheads and twisted support beams, standing as islands of engineering strength in a sea of destruction. During a 1991 UDESTA Canadian-Russian expedition, explorers examined the third-class general room. Even as bulkheads were ripped open and beams bent at impossible angles, the black and white floor tiles remained sharply visible, untouched by the chaos around them. Between the bow and stern lies a debris field known as the breakup area. It covers roughly 3 square miles and contains thousands of objects expelled from the ship as it tore itself apart. Boilers lie scattered like fallen dominoes. Hull plates dozens of feet wide rest on the seabed. Coal from the bunkers forms dark patches known as coal fields. Kitchen equipment from the galleys, pots, pans, shattered china, fills an area ominously called Hell's Kitchen. A massive 60-foot section of the ship's side is cataloged as deck house debris. Personal belongings are everywhere. Shoes, clothing, suitcases. In 2024, a bronze statue of Diana Versailles, once the centerpiece of the first-class lounge, was rediscovered after being photographed in 1986 and then lost again for 38 years. 2 feet tall, fully intact, lying quietly in the sediment. The stern continues to deteriorate faster than the bow. Some experts believe recognizable sections could collapse completely within 30 years. Others think parts have already vanished between expeditions. The stern now stands on the edge of total disappearance, slowly consumed by the ocean and destined never to be seen again. What remains of the stern is no longer a ship. It is a warning, a reminder of what happens when something believed to be indestructible meets the uncontrollable power of nature. The stern doesn't show us what Titanic was. It shows us what everything eventually becomes. History reduced to fragments. And even after 112 years, that destruction still has lessons left to teach. Why it still matters. Every trip to the Titanic uncovers the same striking paradox. The more we discover, the less time we actually have to study it. Back in 1985, scientists believed the extreme depth, 12,500 feet below the surface, would preserve the ship almost perfectly. The frigid cold, crushing pressure, and supposedly lifeless environment were expected to act like a deep freeze. But they were completely mistaken. In just 40 years, the wreck has deteriorated far faster than anyone imagined. Iron-consuming bacteria are breaking down the hull quicker than predicted. Structural collapses are happening at an alarming rate. Even the iconic bow railing fell between the 2022 scans and the 2024 expedition, just in 2 short years. Current projections suggest major sections could vanish within the next 30 years, and some areas might not even survive a decade. Yet documenting the Titanic is about far more than maritime history. It's teaching us about deep-sea life, microbial ecosystems thriving in conditions once thought uninhabitable. Halomonas titanicae, the bacteria consuming the metal, is being studied for real-world applications like waste management, potentially helping to break down metal litter on the ocean floor. The wreck is also revealing hidden truths about the sinking. Three-dimensional scans from 2022 and 2023 captured details that video alone could never show. These digital reconstructions allow experts to pinpoint what a hull failed, how the ship broke apart, and the path each section took as it descended. Future expeditions will reach areas no human has ever explored. The Marconi wireless room, where operators sent distress signals until the final minutes, remains largely intact, according to 2024 assessments. The bow's massive reciprocating engines could still reveal engineering secrets lost since 1912. But there's a sobering reality. Each expedition may be the last to witness certain parts of the ship. Every photo we take could capture something that collapses before cameras return. The Titanic isn't just decaying, it's slowly disappearing. When it finally becomes nothing more than a rust stain on the Atlantic seabed, all that will remain are the records and images we preserve today. Time is running out. The legendary ship is fading, and in those hidden decks, in corridors where lives were lost in 1912, the shadows are growing darker with each passing year. 12,500 feet beneath the waves, the Titanic is quietly revealing its final secrets. Every rusticle that forms, every railing that collapses, every corridor that caves, and is the ocean slowly reclaiming what humanity borrowed for that fateful maiden voyage. The hidden decks likely hold truths we've long avoided. Nothing lasts forever, not even tragedy. We came searching for a ship, but what we discovered was history fading away right before our eyes. The question isn't what remains after 112 years underwater. It's how much time we have left to remember what was lost. Time is slipping away. The deep sea is calling the Titanic home. And before long, even the ghosts we glimpse today will vanish forever.